People don't stop listening because your ideas are bad. They stop listening long before they even decide whether your ideas are good. Think about that for a second. Have you ever been halfway through explaining something and suddenly noticed their eyes drift away? Maybe they nodded politely. Maybe they checked their phone. Maybe they hit you with the world's most painful response. Yeah. Anyway. And in that moment, it feels like your words just fell off a cliff. What's frustrating is that you know you're smart. You know what you're saying makes sense. You know you have something valuable to contribute. So why does it feel like people listen to some people instantly while others have to fight for every second of attention? I used to think communication was about having better information. Then I learned a lesson that changed everything. Years ago, I watched two people tell the exact same story. The first person gave every detail, the dates, the facts, the context, the background. Technically, it was a better story. Nobody cared. The second person told the same story, but everyone leaned in. People laughed, people reacted, people remembered it afterward, and I couldn't understand why. The information was almost identical. Then it hit me. Communication is not the transfer of information. Communication is the transfer of emotion. People don't listen because of what you're saying. They listen because of how you're making them feel. And once you understand this, you'll start noticing why people stop listening when you speak. The first reason is surprisingly simple. You start too far away from the point. Imagine someone asks you a simple question. How was your weekend? And you respond like this. Well, on Saturday morning, I woke up a little later than usual because Friday night I was watching this documentary, which reminded me of something that happened 3 years ago. 5 minutes later, they're wondering if they'll ever see their family again. We've all done this, because in our minds, context matters. We want people to understand everything, but attention works differently. Attention is like a doorway. If you don't walk through it quickly, it closes. Great communicators don't start with context. They start with curiosity. Instead of beginning at the beginning, they begin at the interesting part. Think about movies. Imagine if every action movie started with 45 minutes of tax paperwork before the first explosion. Nobody would stay. Yet that's exactly what many people do in conversations. Here's something you can apply immediately. The next time you're telling a story, start with the moment of highest tension. Start with the surprising thing. Start with the question. Start with the emotional hook. Instead of saying, last week I went to a restaurant, try, I accidentally embarrassed myself in front of an entire restaurant last week. Now people want to know what happened. Curiosity is a magnet. And the moment people become curious, they start pulling themselves into your message. Notice something important. I just opened a loop in your mind. You're probably wondering if I'm going to tell you what happened in that restaurant. That's what great communicators do constantly. They create tiny questions that people need answered, which leads to the second reason people stop listening. You're giving answers before creating questions. This is one of the biggest mistakes in communication. Let's say you're explaining a new idea at work. You immediately start listing features, benefits, and details. But the listener hasn't yet decided why they should care. It's like handing someone a key before they've seen the door. Human beings are naturally curious creatures. We love solving mysteries. We love finding patterns. We love discovering answers, but we rarely enjoy being force-fed information we didn't ask for. I once met a magician who taught me something fascinating. He said the secret isn't hiding the answer. The secret is making people desperately want the answer. That's communication. Before giving information, create a gap. Create curiosity, ask a question, paint a picture, highlight a problem, then provide the solution. For example, instead of saying, confidence improves communication, you could say, have you ever noticed that some people say ordinary things but somehow sound incredibly convincing? Now the listener is engaged, their brain is searching. And when you finally reveal the answer, it lands with far more impact. This matters in meetings, it matters in interviews, it matters on dates, it matters when speaking to friends, because attention isn't given, it's earned. And curiosity is often the fastest way to earn it. But there's another reason people stop listening that almost nobody talks about. Your energy doesn't match your message. Let me explain. Imagine someone walks up to you and says, I just won the lottery. But they say it with the enthusiasm of a tired potato. No smile, no excitement, no change in expression. Would you believe them? Probably not. Now imagine someone says, I had the most ordinary day ever, but they're bursting with energy. Suddenly you're interested. Why? Because humans trust emotion more than words. Your voice is carrying information, but your energy is carrying belief, and people listen to belief. I learned this lesson the hard way. When I first started speaking, I focused entirely on the words. I thought if I chose perfect sentences, people would automatically listen. Instead, I sounded like someone reading instructions on a microwave. Technically correct, emotionally forgettable. Then one day, someone told me something I'll never forget. They said, "Stop saying the words, start experiencing them." Everything changed. When you're telling a funny story, feel the humor. When you're sharing excitement, feel the excitement. When you're describing frustration, reconnect with the frustration. Your audience doesn't experience your words. They experience your state, and state is contagious. Ever noticed how one enthusiastic person can energize an entire room, or how one bored speaker can drain all the oxygen out of it? Energy spreads. That's why people listen, not because you're louder, not because you're more dramatic, but because your emotional state gives life to your message. Now here's where it gets even more interesting. There's a fourth reason people stop listening. You make the conversation about information instead of connection. This one changed how I think about communication forever. Most people enter conversations trying to prove something. They want to prove they're knowledgeable, funny, interesting, successful, smart. And ironically, the harder you try to prove yourself, the less people connect with you. Why? Because people aren't listening for perfection. They're listening for humanity. Think about your favorite person to talk to. What makes them memorable? Is it because they know everything? Probably not. It's usually because they make you feel seen, they ask questions, they listen, they respond to what you're actually saying. They don't just wait for their turn to talk. A conversation is not a performance, it's a partnership. And the moment people feel you're more interested in impressing them than understanding them, attention begins to fade. Here's a simple challenge. The next time you're speaking with someone, become genuinely curious about them. Not strategically curious, not fake curious, actually curious. What are they excited about? What are they worried about? What are they trying to achieve? When people feel understood, they naturally become more willing to understand you. Connection creates attention, and attention creates influence. Now, remember that restaurant story I mentioned earlier? Let me tell you what happened. I was having dinner with a group of people, and there was one person at the table who completely controlled the conversation. Not because they talked the most. Actually, they spoke less than everyone else. But whenever they spoke, everyone listened. At first, I assumed they must have incredible stories, but after paying attention, I noticed something surprising. Their stories weren't better. Their communication was. They started with curiosity, they created tension, they varied their energy, they made people feel included, and most importantly, they paid attention to the audience. If people looked confused, they clarified. If people seemed excited, they expanded. If people laughed, they leaned into it. They weren't delivering a speech, they were dancing with the room. That image stayed with me, because communication isn't throwing words at people, it's dancing with attention, and dancing requires awareness. You can't dance well if you're only focused on yourself. You have to feel the other person. You have to notice their reactions. You have to adapt. The best communicators aren't obsessed with what they're saying, they're obsessed with how it's being received. And that's a powerful shift, because suddenly communication becomes less about performing and more about connecting. Less about perfection and more about presence, less about having the right words and more about creating the right experience. So if you've ever felt ignored, if you've ever felt like people talk over you, if you've ever walked away from a conversation wishing you'd expressed yourself better, don't assume you're boring. Don't assume you're not smart enough. Don't assume your ideas don't matter. Most people don't have an idea problem. They have a delivery problem. The good news, delivery is learnable. You can learn to start with curiosity. You can learn to create questions before answers. You can learn to bring more energy into your message. You can learn to focus on connection instead of performance. And when you do, something amazing happens. People don't just hear you, they feel you, they remember you, they trust you, because the most powerful communicators understand a simple truth. People rarely remember every word you said. They remember how they felt while listening. So the next time you speak, don't ask yourself, how can I sound smarter? Ask yourself, how can I make this impossible to ignore? Because when you stop trying to impress people and start trying to connect with them, your words gain weight, your stories gain power, your presence gains influence, and the people around you begin doing something you've wanted all along. They lean in, they stay engaged, and they listen.